I don't want to give the impression to anyone that in the last hour of the show that I was in any way defending radical Islam when I was talking about how throughout at least the last 100 to 125, 30 years, Western countries have taken a big stick and smacked it against that hornet's nest. And I was referencing the fact that we have elements of our own culture, which many of us don't care for, which obviously they find very offensive in their part of the world. That said, if I could make an analogy here, if you go over to Yellowstone and you see a baby bison wandering along and you're dumb enough to stick it in the back of your truck because you think it's cold, the bison gets euthanized because of that human contact it had. Not the bison's fault, but on the other hand, there's a bear that, likes to come into campsites because people have been feeding it. The bear is dangerous still. So the bear has to go. You understand that. It's 61. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 8 minutes after 9 o'clock. And thank you for joining me this morning. Did you hear in the 9 o'clock newscast, President Obama is finally going to acknowledge that there may have been terrorist attacks over the weekend in the United States? Well, first I'm going to go out and play another 9 holes of golf. Then I'm going to collect some more money from Wall Street for my good friend Hillary, who once suggested that I was born in Kenya, although it's all Donald Trump's fault. General Michael Flynn, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, now retired, served as a 3-star general, made an appearance on Fox with Maria Bartiromo, sometimes known as the Money Honey, 20 years ago. But she was speaking with him about what was taking place in New Jersey, New York, and to an extent, of course, St. Cloud, Minnesota over the weekend. General Flynn made it clear we need a better approach than we currently have, and that currently is coming from folks like Barack Obama.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say is we have to stop reacting and start acting. I mean, what the governor just said is that, we're going to put 1,000 more resources. We got the National Guard. We are going to have to reinforce with resources our law enforcement professionals. Frankly, until we can get this thing, until we can deal with this enemy the way we need to deal with this enemy, we're going to have to provide resources, and we're going to have to provide a different type of authorities for our law enforcement professionals from the federal, state, local, tribal level across this country. Otherwise, we're going to continue to see these types of attacks.
Did you hear even involved, he said, in getting tribal police involved? In other words, it's not just a responsibility from security from an FBI, for instance, or from your state police, but it includes your sheriff's department, your local police. But when he said tribal police, because there is some concern, especially along the southern border of this country, that some of these people actually crossed disguised as, illegal immigrants. Dark hair, darker skin, they might pass. And that some of them may, once they have gotten here, decided to take up residence hiding in some territories, Indian reservations perhaps. The other thing, and I was sharing this with a friend over the weekend, a few weeks ago I read a story in one of the big East Coast newspapers, and it was saying that we have a tremendous number of squatters who are living on federal lands here in the West. Now, the federal government does know where some of them are, and so far hasn't bothered many. But the land masses here are so vast, and I noticed this just driving over the weekend out to Bruno Canyon and back. The land masses are so vast, we don't know where a lot of people could be. They could be pitching a tent, living out in the middle of nowhere, and just waiting for the day when they're ready to strike. They may have picked up their instructions that on, June 22nd, 2017, they're going to come out of the hills and they're going to have a mass attack. We don't know. 9/11, and it's 60. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air. Hello? All right. Lights on, nobody home. 736-0300. That's 736-0300 if you'd like to reach our show. I was driving over the weekend, in fact, and I was in this area where somebody had given me bum directions. Well, I'll put it this way. I saw a sign And as I was telling Randy Staples, the sign was somewhat bleached out and someone had drawn an arrow on it. So I took this arrow, which handmade arrow, and I ended up way off the beaten path of where I expected to be. And I was driving on roads that are no more than cow paths, really. And I ended up in some pretty hilly terrain, too. Not mountainous per se, but hilly terrain, where I was on these winding roads. And sometimes they were nothing but deep sand. And other places, some of them were mud. And driving along with no guardrails. And I came around this bend and there's this small area just off this dirt road, and it was only big enough for a short recreational vehicle. There was a pickup truck parked there and a storage shed. Somebody is living on that spot. They just simply parked the RV there, probably no property tax to deal with, right? And this is where they're living, out in the middle of nowhere. I have a friend from college. He decided to drop out of society, gosh, at least 25 years ago. And he lives, he says it takes about half an hour to an hour to drive to Taos, New Mexico from where he lives. He went out and he pitched a tent on a mesa. Nobody knows who owns the property, I guess, or they claim that they don't know. It's probably federal government. And he said over the years he started building. Then when he got a little money together now and then, he'd build a little more and build a little more. Built his own solar panels, built his own system for water. He's got a cistern there and he filters the water and uses that. Till eventually he had a pretty good sized house and he has a subsistence farm. And he sells a few things from the farm and makes enough money to put a little gas in the gas tank. And every couple of weeks he drives down into Taos and he picks up something to eat, something additional that he may not have at home that he can't grow on his own. And this is the way he has literally lived for 25 years. I mean, I'm absolutely, he walked away from a job managing a huge retail chain. And he had a lot of money at the time, and that perhaps helped out because he didn't start out poor. But I'm telling you, I asked him, 5 or 6 years ago, the last time I saw him in person, I said, does anybody know you're out there? He says, well, I suppose they do, but nobody much bothers us because we don't bother anyone else. Meaning that there are a handful of other people who are scattered along, but they don't make any waves. So yes, people can disappear still in this country, and they can disappear far back into the forests that we have, and here in the West especially. So when we talk about these cells, they're not all in urban areas such as New Jersey or New York City. They could be spread all over the place. And because we do not have systems in place to track them, and we have poor border security, and we don't vet people well, our chickens may soon come home to roost. Donald Trump, as I mentioned earlier, has gotten the liberals fired up about all of this. Well, everything he has done in the last 15 months has managed to upset lefty to no end. The Politico had a piece over the weekend by a writer named Joshua Mitchell, who was responding to liberals and sometimes these neoconservatives as well, who say that Trump doesn't have any ideas. And he says, Trump has 6 basic ideas. Number 1, borders matter. Number 2, immigration policy matters. Number 3, national interests, not so-called universal interests, matter. 4, entrepreneurship matters. 5, decentralization matters. 6, politically correct speech, without which identity politics is inconceivable, must be repudiated. And this guy goes on to talk a little bit about how identity politics set up by the Democrats to win elections has been destroying the country. He also writes, one of the more pathological notions of our age is that political life can be understood in terms of principles that must be applied to circumstances. Politics is engineering, if you will. Republicans themselves succumbed to this notion, and members of the rank and file have noticed. Republicans stood for the principles of the Constitution or the principles of the free market, etc. The problem with standing for principles is that it allows you to remain unsullied by the political fray, to stand back and wait until yet another presidential election cycle when our principles can perhaps be applied. And if we lose, it's okay because we still have our principles. And he says this doesn't necessarily mean that Trump is unprincipled. It means rather that he doesn't believe that yet another policy paper based on conservative principles is going to save either America or the Republican Party. I highly recommend, if you haven't had a chance to see this yet, that you actually you read this. Maybe print it up and share it with your friends. It is one of the best rundowns. It's about 10 pages long, about one of the best rundowns I have seen on the Trump campaign. And again, it comes from the Politico. But if you go today, if you've got access, web access, go to the site Real Clear Politics. And when you get to the site Real Clear Politics, every day there's a link to some of the top stories, political stories. They do Real Clear Sports, Real Clear Science, Real Clear Religion, but Real Clear Politics. And you will see this story from the Politico by Joshua Mitchell. Take a look at that. It's lengthy, but it's well worth reading. And it tells you that we do have an opportunity still. It's slim, but we might be able to turn this country around. 918, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. When you were talking earlier about being misunderstood, we have, as a country, poked a few hornets' nests. But in the past, we were a country with moral standards and everything else, and we did great things. We made great things. We accomplished great things. And if need be, we went and helped out and lost a lot of lives doing it. But we got to the point somewhere with the progressives where we had to stick our nose in everybody's business and almost force them to be like us. As a religious person, I don't know of anybody that's been converted by force versus example.
And you bring that up, this whole notion, and the progressive, it got picked up by these neoconservatives who convinced President Bush, the latter, that if we just went around the world, we could overthrow governments and everyone would want a McDonald's restaurant and they'd want a Congress and a president and live just like we live. And it didn't work.
No, but more people still today, even though we poked a few hornets' nests, there are more people wanting into our country than are willing to go away because of what we believe.
True. And I, the unfortunate part of all this is I was sharing with some friends over the weekend is that you do have some people living in some of these Muslim countries. They want nothing to do with their religious faith, but they can't walk away from it, otherwise they get killed. They want nothing to do with it, and they would just like to get away from it and come to places like the United States where they could live without it. Unfortunately, again, we don't know which ones they are versus the others.
Right, and that's the big problem with the immigration. We get accused all the time of being racist and everything else. I don't care about any religion more than any other, as long as they're not out to hurt us and they're willing to assimilate. Let bygones be bygones. If they want to practice their way. Just don't try to ramrod it down everybody's throat.
I've got a hard break coming, but thank you for the call. In other words, they want to come here and cure cancer. God bless them. We've got more on this subject on the way. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on KLIX. A quick mention this morning that if you're feeling a little under the weather, and maybe with the way that the weather actually has been lately, where a couple of cold days and a couple of hot days and a couple of cold days, a couple of hot days, sometimes that does happen. But, before you start thinking about, getting all medicated up with all of those products the pharmaceutical companies would like to sell you, think about maybe more traditional methods of healing. We'd like to recommend Dr. Eric F. Jones. He uses a holistic, systemic approach to wellness, and he's been doing this for, nearly 25 years. He has master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy. Dr. Eric F. Jones uses methods of alternative healing, such as naturopathy, medicinal herbs, nutrition, sound waves, intellectual and cognitive self-recognition. He can also, or self-regulation and napathy as well, to help remedy and manage mental, emotional, physical, and your spiritual challenges as well. He's currently accepting new patients, and he has evening and Saturday appointments available. Telephone number 731-7178. And, by the way, you can find him on Facebook at Eric F. Jones, Ph.D., Mental Health and Wellness Therapist. And we do hope that you check him out. As I say, he is looking for new patients, and his office is actually relatively close to our studios. He's got two, we should point out, here in the Twin Falls area. Mentioning just a wee bit earlier about some of the ridiculous changes we're seeing in our country. We're trying to reorder man, if you will. We're trying to destroy his basic nature. And this is why I think we run afoul of terrorists and other people around the world. And again, I said earlier, it's not, we're not blaming ourselves, but there's a story out today that there's a guy at a human rights office working for the federal government. There's a story today in the Washington Examiner how he is putting out that people on college campuses have to behave themselves when it comes to their sexual relationships, and telling a young woman, if you're a man, that she looks good today is now sexual violence. They would like to prosecute people for this. They are trying to destroy us at our most basic levels, to strip us of our humanity. 926, we have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.
Yes, Bill, I'm calling back, but I think this is pretty important. The State Department just realized that they were supposed to deport 858 special interest country refugees or immigrants, 858, and then they found out they released them. And they released them with these kind of visas that these people can actually go to work in our law enforcement. Now, I don't know the details of this, but it's just breaking. But you see, this is the kind of thing, this kind of inept bull, you know what, that is killing us. Can you imagine the expense that we spend trying to, find out where these people are, and then after they raise hell, cleaning up the mess? It's just insane. I'm going to hang up. Thanks.
Well, and we release the potential Islamic terrorists. We release criminal illegal aliens. They go out and they kill beautiful young women like Kate Steinle, or they kill a sheriff's deputy, as happened over the weekend. And it's madness. But you know what? It makes the Democrats feel good about themselves. And if you say, well, wait a minute, this is not good, then the Democrats will say, well, you're a racist bigot and you're not compassionate. You know what? There's no compassion in building a bomb out of a pressure cooker and trying to blow up a race that is there to benefit wounded Marines. There is no compassion in blowing up a bomb in the Chelsea section of New York City, where innocent people are just out walking the streets. There is no compassion in going into a mall in St. Cloud, Minnesota, dressed up as a security guard, screaming "Allah Akbar" and running around asking people if they're Muslims, and if they say no, carving them up. All of you leftists out there who keep trying to sell us that bill of goods, you really need to get out of the way and let us clean up this mess. 928. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Our previous caller made a couple of references to the way things used to be in this country. I've been mentioning this since last week. I'd like to, before we wrap up the show today, it's a little lengthy. It's about 5 minutes long. I referenced way back in 1973 a piece by the Canadian broadcaster Byron McGregor called The Americans, and how, despite all of the folks who try to denigrate us in this country, what really good people Americans happen to be. And if I could, I want to share that before the end of the show today. But listen to that, too, because several of the references that he makes about Americans building things are things we just simply don't build any longer, which is a sad commentary in itself. Also, want to mention, coming up Wednesday morning on our program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, we'll be joined by one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Tripp Family Medicine, located on Fillmore Street, directly across from the main post office. And I'd like to point out, still looking for new patients. And it's not guaranteed, but for the most part, if you get up some morning and something is ailing you and you need to see a medical professional, and you call Dr. Tripp's office, generally they can have you in within a few hours, look you over and make sure everything is okay, and if not, point you in the right direction. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. It's 9:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 60. As I've been threatening for the last couple of weeks, this is Byron McGregor, Canadian broadcaster, in 1973, with his commentary called The Americans. Take a listen to this. This will fill up this segment of the program. Then I'd be interested in your reaction to it and what it sounds like 43 years after it was first recorded.
The United States dollar took another pounding on German, French, and British exchanges this morning, hitting the lowest point ever known in West Germany. It has declined there by 41% since 1971, and this Canadian thinks it's time to speak up for the Americans as the most generous and possibly the least appreciated people in all the world. As long as 60 years ago, when I first started to read newspapers, I read of floods on the Yellow River and the Yangtze. Well, who rushed in with men and money to help? The Americans did, that's who. They have helped control floods on the Nile, the Amazon, the Ganges, and the Niger. Today, the rich bottomland of the Mississippi is underwater, and no foreign land has sent a dollar to help. Germany, Japan, and to a lesser extent Britain and Italy were lifted out of the debris of war by the Americans, who poured in billions of dollars and forgave other billions in debts. None of those countries is today paying even the interest on its remaining debts to the United States. When the franc was in danger of collapsing in 1956, it was the Americans who propped it up, and their reward was to be insulted and swindled on the streets of Paris. And I was there, I saw that. When distant cities are hit by earthquake, it's the United States that hurries in to help. Managua, Nicaragua is one of the most recent examples. So far this spring, 59 American communities have been flattened by tornadoes. Nobody has helped. The Marshall Plan, the Truman policy, all pump billions upon billions of dollars into discouraged countries. And now newspapers in those countries are writing about the decadent, warmongering Americans. Now, I'd like to see just one of those countries that is gloating over the erosion of the United States dollar build its own airplane. Come on now, you, let's hear it. Does any country in the world have a plane to equal the Boeing jumbo jet, the Lockheed TriStar, or the Douglas 10? If so, why don't they fly them? Why do all international lines except Russia fly American planes? Why does no other land on Earth even consider putting a man or a woman on the moon? You talk about Japanese technocracy and you get radios. You talk about German technocracy and you get automobiles. You talk about American technocracy and you find men on the moon, not once but several times, and safely home again. You talk about scandals and the Americans put theirs right in the store window for everybody to look at. Even the draft dodgers are not pursued and hounded. They're right here on our streets in Toronto. Most of them, unless they're breaking Canadian laws, are getting American dollars from Ma and Pa at home to spend up here. When the Americans get out of this bind, as they will, who could blame them if they said to hell with the rest of the world? Let somebody else buy the bonds. Let somebody else build or repair foreign dams or design foreign buildings that won't shake apart in earthquakes. When the railways of France and Germany and India were breaking down through age, it was the Americans who rebuilt them. When the Pennsylvania Railroad or the New York Central went broke, nobody loaned them an old caboose. Both of them are still broke. I can name to you 5,000 times when the Americans raced to the help of other people in trouble. Can you name to me even one time when someone else raced to the Americans in trouble? I don't think there was outside help even during the San Francisco earthquake. Our neighbors have faced it alone, and I'm one Canadian who is damn tired of hearing them kicked around. They'll come out of this thing with their flag high, and when they do, they're entitled to thumb their noses at the lands that are gloating over their present trouble. I hope Canada is not one of these. But there are many smug, self-righteous Canadians. And finally, the American Red Cross was told at its 48th annual meeting in New Orleans this morning that it was broke. This year's disaster, with the year less than half over, has taken it all, and nobody, but nobody, has helped.
Now, as bad as things were back in 1973, 43 more years of liberals trying to destroy this country have made things obviously a lot worse. We'll have more on this coming up in just a couple of minutes. Before we go to the break, though, just a quick mention. It appears that your good friend Ahmed, the terrorist bomber, is in custody after a shootout with police in Linden, New Jersey. In custody means obviously he wasn't killed, which I guess for many people out there means he might be able to give some sort of details on who else may have been involved in his little scheme. We've got more coming up in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 61. Looking at some of the video coming in from Linden, New Jersey, and it appears there was an ambulance, and it just was sitting there for a while with the lights flashing. Now, two things that means. And finally, the Linden police moved out of the way, and the ambulance backed out and left. But number one, it means that the guy got a flesh wound, that he was being treated inside, or number two, that he failed to make it. No, it looks like he did make it. There's actually a video now popping up of him on a stretcher, all bearded and filled with holes. Got some blood on his shoulders. So apparently he is going to be talking at this point. You know what they should probably do, though, is tell him, you can't eat until you talk. Yes, that's right. No meals until you actually start cooperating. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's the way it's going to be. Well, okay. We'll feed you. Here's a ham sandwich. Pretty much I figured that's how it would go. But he looks to be a little dazed and confused after he's been shot down by police. Funny how that works. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. That means, of course, on the web you can listen to us live all over the world. Here's a thought. We had, and of course, he was responsible for, two attacks. A third that he didn't get away with, that was the one in New Jersey at the train station. Although there was an explosion as police were trying to disarm that one. And then you've got the goon who was shot and killed in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And yet they didn't kill anybody. We were darned lucky this time around that we've gotten away with this, where the stabbing victims apparently all going to make it, and the bombing victims are all apparently going to make it. But this could be the next time a lot worse when it comes to a count, a body count. And my point is that unless we get a handle on this, we had a caller about 15 minutes ago who mentioned that some hundreds of these people have been turned loose, and they were supposed to be deported, and some of them actually could end up getting into police academies. And then I had a quick note from a friend of mine who was listening out of state, and he's retired as a federal undercover narcotics agent, and he said what you could see happen there is these people could get into these academies, and then they could do what happened in Iraq, where we were trying to train policemen, and then they would turn on the trainers, and they would kill Americans in those situations. We're trying to avoid, and of course that would be workplace violence, according to this current White House. It would have nothing to do with the religious war that they are trying to institute with us at this point. I look at this, the story is much bigger. As it turns out, those hundreds who were released, and who could end up in police academies, as it turns out, there were 315,000 people who they failed to fingerprint and double check, or even check in the first place, who the government turned back out onto the street. Now, many of them were illegal aliens, and they're not likely a serious threat other than the fact that they may take your job. But, again, we don't know how many of these people, when we say illegal aliens, we tend to think of only one or two countries in Central and South America. But there are people who come here from all over the world illegally. And I'm just reading a note here from one of our political candidates. Don't worry, I will not identify you, but thank you for the response. The fact of the matter is, if you've got 315,000 people out there, and 310,000 are just people who are thinking, well, I'm in the good old USA now, maybe I can find work, and send money back home to my family. So that's 310,000 jobs Americans won't get, but at least likely nobody is dead. And as a percentage, only 5,000 out of 315,000 is tiny. But if those 5,000 mean us harm, holy mackerel. 948, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And right now it's 64, on our way perhaps into the 70s, upper 70s today, maybe even lower 80s before the day is over with. Telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300, 736-0300. You're up next and you're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Just real quick here, the problem with America is that after they go and get these terrorists that do the bombings and the stabbings and all this, they stop there. They stop halfway. They don't go after the people who brought them in. They just go on as president, or in both this case, and they run for president. You know,
this guy is going to end up.
shameful.
He's going to end up just, he'll go through a trial. We'll have to pay for his lawyer. That'll be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in trial security. And then he'll get sent off to a prison so he gets 3 squares a day. And he'll live for another 70 years. And just feeding off the system. And where's the deterrence in any of that? Do you think that any of these guys, because it's a holy war for them, do you think there's any deterrence in the fact they may end up spending a lot of time sitting in a prison somewhere in Clarion, Pennsylvania, or Leavenworth, Kansas? Of course not. The only thing these people understand, and I used to catch grief from all the liberals. I was doing a talk show back during when the second Gulf War, that is, the Iraqi war was raging, and I would point out the only thing these people in that part of the world respect is violence. They do not respect someone who comes in and says, "Wow, we'll build you a new hospital and a couple of schools." Now, don't do that. Gosh, stop blowing things up. I told you, don't do that. Oh. And all of your cultures are equal. If you'd like to go on raping little boys here on base, you go right ahead because we wouldn't want to interfere. On the other hand, if you go in there and you smack them in the jaw and say, "This isn't going to happen again," then they'll get the idea. Wasn't General Flynn, it might have been Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters. A few weeks ago, I happened to see Peters on TV, and he was being asked about the capital, Raqqa, of the Islamic State. And he said, I hate to say this, but 10,000 innocent people may die. We need to go in and level that city and destroy them. And the liberals were like, "Oh, how dare he say that?" How many innocent people died in Dresden and Hamburg during World War II, during the firebombing of Germany? How many innocent people died in the firebombing of Tokyo? How many innocent people died in Nagasaki and Hiroshima when the atomic bombs were dropped? Now, are we going to apologize for all of that, or did ending the war, ending the war and saving lives down the road, did that justify what we did? Maybe in getting tough with these people, we have to get our hands a little dirty. But in the long run, if it saves humanity and civilization, then perhaps it's the price we have to pay. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air at 9:51 on KLIX. Go ahead.
Bill, President Jefferson, for years, the Muslims, the Barbary pirates, were extorting the U.S. for lots of money in order to allow the shipping. Finally, Jefferson had had enough, so he sent the Navy with high, stiff leather collars over to Tripoli. They went in and wiped out villages. I mean, men, women, and children. And after that point, we had no problems with the Muslims with our shipping, and it proves the point that you're just saying. But this goes back to the early 1800s.
Think about what happened in Lebanon when they were grabbing Westerners off the streets and holding them hostage. They made the mistake of grabbing a couple of Soviet citizens. This is back in the 1980s. So the KGB went out and abducted a couple of family members of the terrorists and then started sending body parts back. And all of the Soviet citizens got quickly released.
Yeah, I mean, so like you say, the only thing they understand is brute force. And so Jefferson set the precedent way back at the beginning of this country. But when you got people here now, they won't even say the word radical Islam terrorist. I mean, as Hillary and Obama, I mean, in our military's hands, our police hands, because of no profiling. So again, we need to be voting for Trump, regardless of whether you think he's the best man or not. But compared to Hillary, I mean, to tell you, it would be just absolutely the end of this republic if Hillary gets elected.
I would agree with that. There's not much time left. I was reading this morning where just among the states, we talk about the debts the federal government has. Just among the states right now, the states have a combined debt. 40 of them, 40 out of the 50 are in debt. And that debt is about $1.5 trillion. And that's not even including what they promised the retirees when it comes to their health care benefits and their pensions. And you've got people looking to destroy us from without and from within. And unfortunately, Hillary Clinton is from that group that is looking to destroy us from within. And they just keep promising everyone the moon, sun, and stars when you simply can't afford it. It's just not going to be there. It's ridiculous to think otherwise. And when we get to the point where we can't afford to pay our bills any longer, we won't be able to pay for our self-defense. And that means that these people that are terrorizing us now will be able to do it with impunity. 9:54, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And I don't care what the Europeans would think about us getting tough with these people. I don't care what the New York Times would think about us getting tough with these people, or the Washington Post, or any of the other panty-waists in media who are currently promoting the Democrat Party. You know what was really disturbing last night? I caught a few minutes of 60 Minutes. I haven't watched that show in years, but they were talking about how close we potentially could be to fighting a nuclear war again. And I guess they think we'd be fighting it with the Russians, even though it's the Chinese that are being most provocative. And why we can't see this and realize that maybe an alliance with Russia would be good for us. Donald Trump says it would be good for us. But they sat down at the end of the segment last night. They didn't finish it and said, well, we'll have more on this next week. And then they brought up who would be best. The question was, who would best? Because they kept repeating, only the president can give the order to fire these nuclear weapons. Only the president can give the orders to fire these nuclear weapons. Only the president can give the orders to fire these nuclear weapons. Yes, they would like to answer the question, who would be most trustworthy then with giving those orders? And you know what CBS 60 Minutes is going to be doing. When they get back to this story next week, and the closer we get to Election Day, they're going to be screaming, don't elect Donald Trump. He's going to blow up the world. Why would anybody even get that idea? Well, he's unstable. I've, got a few beefs with him and have since he started running. But honestly, does anyone really believe that Donald Trump was itching to go in there and start launching nuclear missiles? For crying out loud, he said we can do business with Russia. Why then would you claim that he's the more dangerous of the two major party candidates? Well, once again, because likely you are allied with Hillary Clinton and her Democrat fellow travelers, and you are looking to be part of that fifth column that would destroy the United States internally. Media cannot be trusted. I opened up the show today talking about what CNN did when they called out Donald Trump for saying that there was a bombing in New York City, when indeed there was a bombing. Oh, he's jumping to conclusions. And yet when Hillary Clinton said the same thing, CNN edited that out of her video, because then after that, CNN's argument wouldn't work. And they will do anything they can from now until Election Day in November to destroy his chances of winning this election. That's all you need to know. When you have to make that decision on who you're going to vote for, ask yourself what their motivation is in tearing him down. And if you can answer that question clearly, and I think most of you can, then you'll likely vote for him, because if they're backing her, then we don't want her. Rush Limbaugh will follow the show here after news at 10 o'clock this morning from Fox. It'll be Sean Hannity following 1 o'clock news from Fox right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Glenn Beck after 4 o'clock news. Dave Ramsey following Glenn Beck tonight from 7 until 10. Bill Colley wanting to say thank you for tuning in this morning. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning at 63. And looking for a very nice day ahead. Enjoy it if you can.